1, 2, 1, 2.
Comfy or not? No. Really?
Well, yes. No, that's fine.
What's he supposed to do? I thought, I don't know.
Well, there wouldn't have been anything there till about 5 minutes ago.
Well, there you go then. It's too late to get this handout in the pack, so we can distribute the real seats, to be honest.
Oh. I'm doing the video.
Okay.
Guys, I think you're in the box up there.
A bit more central. It's a good thing you're so right there. Good morning, everybody. It is absolutely delightful to see you all here today, and thank you everybody for coming. And I know you'll make it an absolutely wonderful day, like the 2 wonderful days we've had before, and it's just great to be in a room with so many Archers fans, and we just talk about it all day. That's fun! So thank you also to the British Library for hosting us. It's a beautiful venue. I hope you find the seats comfortable. I love the fact that there's so much leg room. It's just fantastic. It's a gorgeous venue, so thank you for them having us. Now, the spirit, the ethos of academic arts is curiosity, generosity and joyfulness. And that is how we wish to approach today as well. Like any other academic conference, we'll hear all sorts of people talking about all sorts of things, but unlike other conferences, we will be laughing all the way through it, I'm sure. Quite a lot of laughing at ourselves, to be honest, but there you go. If you want to tweet along with us, that's our hashtag, Academic Archers, and we'll be on that all day. It's also live streaming, hence the cameras being set up here too. You're live tweeting now at the moment.
We just got to 1,000 followers last night.
We have a really, really packed schedule. So, to all of the presenters out there, please keep to time, and that's myself as well. I'm presenting in a moment. The slides are on a rolling loop, as I think I've told you over email, so when you get to the end of your slide, your presentation, just keep on that. The next person that comes up to stage, press the forward button, and it come onto your own slide there. And this is how the day looks, this is how the day stacks up. We're starting off with planning and economic development in Ambridge, which won't be as boring as it sounds. I've seen the papers and they're really great. We have a number of different wildcards through the day of just a real sort of potpourri of different things coming out from the Archers. Said and unsaid, and then of course the Women of Ambridge session this afternoon. I'll leave it at that then. I don't need to say any more. Over lunchtime, there will be a film playing here, which is a film of Archers fans, talking about the Archers fandom. And there's also on the screen out in the foyer, some of the presenters here have done posters of their papers, so they're up there for you to see. And there's also a photographic exhibition going through there as well of Archers fans in the place where they listen to the Archers. It's really, really lovely. So the film will be scrolling here throughout the afternoon, over lunchtime, and then the posters are running all the way through there as well. And we've also got some audience participation. We have a side of Morris dancers with us today. It's not compulsory that you join in. Coming from Somerset though, my West Country genes are active on that one. I think I'll be joining in. But we have to be out of the building by 6 o'clock on the dot. So we were very good at getting in through the building. I think I have to be very good at getting out of the building too. No fire alarms as far as I'm aware, so if there is, we just have to get out of the building, basically. So, we shall start. We're coming up on time. So, first, session, Planning and Economic Development in Ambridge. Starting off with Claire Asprey. If Claire wants to come down to the stage, oh, there you are. I'm here. And you've got handouts from Claire as well. And then Paula Fondy. Where's Paula? Oh, you're there? And then it's me, I'm here. And then Sally Shortall. And Anne, where are they? Oh, you're there. Very good. So that's our session this morning. So, is there anything you want to add?
So, I echo Cara's sentiments about keeping to time. Now, I've got at my seat, so if you've got, I'll give you a 5-minute warning, and I've got my nails bright red so you can see, 5 minutes, 1 minute warning. If you go over your time, I will be throwing a sharpened flapjack at you. And I'm not even joking. I bought them 10 days ago, and I have them, I bought them 10 days ago, I've had the lid off, so they're like bombs. And if you go over your time, then you'll get one right in the face.
I forgot one thing. Helen Grady. Is Helen Grady here?
Yes.
These are for you. Oh. I'm only ever going to do this once. Helen said, if you can provide me with wine and chocolate buttons, I'll come. And I said, okay, that's the deal. So
I've come all the way from Manchester. Right, should we begin?
Yeah, so for this session, I'd like to take questions in chunks, if that's all right. So you present, and then Paula, and hopefully then we'll have a nice 10-15 minutes to talk. What I do in my chair is I take 3 from the audience, which gives the speakers a bit of a chance to respond to whichever bit they want and avoid the bits they can't answer. So that's what I'll do. And I should say, this is very, despite Cara saying this is dull, this is what we do during the day. So the reason that we started talking on Twitter was around the Route B. There was a thing with a planning officer in the village hall, and he was really lame and dull, and it was a nightmare. And we were on Twitter going, oh, nonsense, I've done community engagement events, and they're much better than that. So this is right in kind of the heartland of what we know about. So planning and economic development in Ambridge. Claire Asprey, Dumpty Dum royalty. Hello. No, is my press this button? Yay! Hello everyone. Thank you for having me, and it's just a really honour to open the day. So I am going to keep to time, but if you want to hear me bang on at length about housing, which I can do, find me at a break or connect on Twitter. So, as a housing wonk, I'm always interested in how people in Ambridge get housed, especially the younger generation. I do understand Emma Grundy's frustrations about not being able to afford a house and not being able to provide a stable home for her family. And I know from my day job the challenges of the housing crisis and how rural areas can be especially hard hit. So we Ostrich fans often refer to the Ambridge fairy, so I was really keen to look at the extent to which people in Ambridge depend on external support to get a place to live. But not until I started the research proper did I realise quite how entrenched an issue that it is. So before we focus on the village, a little bit of life beyond Borsetshire. So nationally, our key themes are crisis of affordability, especially in rural areas, lack of affordable housing, and also generational inequalities, which as older generations accumulate housing wealth, this isn't trickling down to younger people equally. And those are themes that we'll see coming through in Ambridge. So, inspired by the work of Rory Coulter at the University of Cambridge, I tracked the housing pathways of all the Generation X, which is people born from 66 to 1980, and the millennials born from 1980, and I looked at their housing pathways, the tenure pathways, and I mapped all the current living arrangements and the dependencies and relationships involved. There's a lot of dependence, and that creates opportunities for patronage and also family wealth to influence housing options. So you've got on your seats, oh, it's not come out too bad, I wasn't sure how it was going to come out, a complicated diagram. So I want to kind of flag 4 main findings, but somebody asked me a question at the break about the retreat of the state, because I've got things to say about that. So firstly, the role of family wealth and home ownership. So only 30% of UK first-time buyers rely on family support, but there's not a single household in the Millennial and Generation X cohorts in Ambridge who've done it without family intervention. And they are all children of owner-occupiers. Most recently, Harrison's parents stepped up for to help with the deposit for Woodbine Cottage. Secondly, where people are renting privately, that's often been at a discount facilitated through local relationships. So Emma negotiated a discount at One the Green from Will, and actually Tom and Johnny did the same when they've moved in. No one knows how much it's costing at Grange Farm, but Oliver's too soft-hearted to charge absolute top whack. Thirdly, sharing is a really significant housing option for many people in Ambridge, and it creates dependent relationships across families and across the village community. So sharing a home as a lodger or an intergenerational household is a really established means by which people in Ambridge house themselves, and this is what Paul is going to pick up in the next presentation, which is going to be great. So, for example, both Kirsty and Jazza, as people without wider family in the village, have been dependent on shared accommodation for a long time. And even where people are renting, in this cohort, you can see that 2 of the 3 renting households are actually sharing households. So you need to live in by yourself. So finally, farming arrangements play a really significant specific role in Ambridge. So in the Millennial and the Generation X cohort, Pip, Will and Nick and the Fairbrethren are all living in farm accommodation, and Kate and Alice have got the cottages on the farm at Home Farm, 3 houses, very nice. So, well done, Anisha. She's the only character from the entire Generation X and Millennial cohort to pay for her own independent accommodation at full market price. She's a vet from Glasgow with no dependents, so that shows you that most rural wages are not going to stretch to housing a young family in Ambridge. So, now we know about the dependents. What does it tell us about the Ambridge Fairy? Well, a really important thing to note at this point is that people who have property businesses in Ambridge are not under pressure to step into that role. So Lillian's Amside's business is not usually seen as a route for young people to get a place to live, although some people have now and again. And the Bridge Farm development that Justin's doing is only providing affordable housing to meet planning requirements, and I've got words to say about that as well. But other community-focused solutions would have been available that they didn't take. So sometimes the Ambridge Fairy is a bolt from the blue, like Will's inheritance. But actually, more often, it's like one of those puzzles where you move the squares around in a picture. So, you know, we've had Christine moved in with Peggy, that's left Woodbine free for Harrison and Fallon. And the dynamic that's special to Ambridge, or perhaps to rural communities altogether, but it's not been well researched, is the role for farm accommodation. So whether it's tied accommodation like Will's, Woodbine, Rickyard Cottage, generally all the houses passed down from Hope Farm to Alice and Kate. So some people have to work harder than others to have that kind of opportunity land in their lap. So just within the intergenerational tenure pathways, it certainly helps to have a big farm and especially a rich relative in order to generate the Ambridge Fairy. Thank you very much. Hello, Paul. Yes. Yeah.
All right, good morning, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So my presentation today asks why the prevalence of extended family and non-kin co-residence is so high in Ambridge, or perhaps, more to the point, why was a grown woman sleeping in the dining room? Why did Jazzer break his string of romantic conquest to live with Jim Lloyd? So to define my terms, co-residence is simply individuals who are living in a shared dwelling as their common primary residence. An extended family co-residence is one where a household where at least one adult is related to but not married or romantically connected to the household head, and this may include adult children who are no longer in school. Non-kin co-residence is households occupied by unrelated individuals, what we think of as housemates or flatmates. Looking at the Ambridge map in red here, I've circled some examples of extended family co-residence at Grange Farm and Brookfield Farm. The blue circles were meant to illustrate cases of non-kin co-residence. I selected the lodge and where Peggy and Christine live, and the bungalow where the unlikely grouping of Bert Fry and Fair Brothers. But astute listeners will recall that Peggy and Christine are in fact sisters-in-law, making this a rather remote but still a remote example of extended family co-residence. So extended family and non-kin co-residence in Ambridge is remarkably high compared to national averages. In the 2011 census of England and Wales, about 8% of households could be classified as extended family or non-kin co-residents. By my estimation of known occupancy of households in Ambridge, about 46% of households fall into this classification. So there are three primary explanations that I'm going to draw on for my field of family demography to consider how these arrangements emerge. And the first is economic need, which is simply the case, is that all of these reasons are conceptually distinct, but they may overlap empirically, simply meaning that people may have more than one reason for living together. So economic need simply refers to an instance where at least one household member cannot afford to live independently. So Jasra would be an example of this, but Jim would not. In contrast, the Grundys at Grange Farm represent a case where no one in the extended family household can afford to live apart. Health and family care typically refer to arrangements where household members provide nursing care to an infirm adult, or where relatives other than a parent provide care to young children. Helen relies on these arrangements for care of Jack and Henry at Bridge Farm, and while there are few infirm adults in the program at the moment, I'll return in a moment to another way of thinking about this explanation that pertains to older adults. Cultural norms refer to attitudes and behaviors that are considered normal or typical in a group whose members share a common identity. Often cultural norms are hard to recognize among the people who live by them. They're simply the way things are, but they're not necessarily universal. So for example, the American preoccupation with ice cubes and orthodonture may be anathema of most of the world. These three explanations are to some extent fairly obvious and in an abstract or generic sense, but Ambridge provides a really nice context to think about them a bit more deeply and perhaps to influence how we think about co-residence even in other settings. So turning to the example, to thinking about cultural norms first, and I think picking up very much on what Claire commented on, we can think about land ownership. I argue that the cultural norms that are associated with land ownership in particular create distinctive opportunities and enforce obligations among individuals who have some tie to the land. The legal and economic framework that supported a system of primogeniture and reliance on family members to work land holdings in rural Britain are no longer in force, but echoes of these systems remain in place at Brookfield, Bridge, and Home Farms. They are places adult children can remain or return to, giving them some measure of security in the world. But their own sense of agency is constrained by a common sense of filial obligation in the family. While other unmarried women like Brenda Tucker and Amy Franks have left Ambridge, Pip soldiers on at Brookfield, seeking some occasional measure of independence in her residential choices, only to be lured back perennially by her anxious parents and the assurance that there will always be a flapjack in the chimney as long as she doesn't share it with Toby. Very importantly, this model of opportunity and obligation only holds for family members, as Claire noted. People outside of the family cannot expect an extended welcome at Lower Loxley. The past few years at Home Farm have presented a revolving door model of extended family access to tenured property. At various times, Kate, Phoebe, Nolatondo, and Lillian unsatiated expectation of a lasting welcome. And when the household reached its densest occupancy, its patriarch routinely fled to the bowl for breathing room. Again, this access was available only to immediate kin. In an interesting recent plot twist, however, Lexi has been granted a stay in a cottage on home farm property during her expected pregnancy, and a marker of her contingent connection to the family. Turning to economic need, Claire has already done a wonderful job of describing how housing scarcity and opposition to development drive up home prices. Those who lack a connection to the land rely on a system of patronage from a less well-endowed, mostly unmarried tier of homeowners. The tight housing market in Ambridge is periodically brought into relief as the unpropertied find themselves on the cusp of being driven out by issues of scarcity and inaffordability. Nearly always, though, our village residents are able to remain or return as the beneficiaries of someone else's largesse or misfortune. Recent examples of individuals or couples who have sought housing elsewhere only to return to Ambridge include Emma and Ed, who were able to return to Grange Farm with their extended family when the Tuscan sun beckoned Oliver and Caroline, and who may finally gain a foothold in the housing market through a combination of chicken factory wages and Justin Elliott's affordable housing plan. Harrison and Fallon were prepared to sacrifice the shabby charm and convenience of Woodbine when Harrison's parents stepped into the breach with a private loan that also afforded Christine the opportunity to convert not only the proceeds from the sale of the home, but all of her assets into a cash windfall for Hugo Melling. When Kirsty returned to Ambridge, she found ample spare bedrooms to rent after the exodus inspired by Locksfest. And only Tom was able to return to Ambridge without serendipitous intervention. His parents willingly received him into the Bridge Farm's apparently TARDIS-like, ever-expansive interior. Finally, turning to health and family care, the Archers opens a new window on this particular topic. I suggested in Ambridge, co-residence by older adults in non-kin and extended family arrangements is less about seeking physical health care and more a strategy to protect against isolation and loneliness. In a country that brought the plight of Eleanor Rigby to public attention and recently appointed a minister for loneliness, it seems fitting that Ambridge's older residents would accept or seek out co-residence as one means of social connection and companionship. Current examples of this odd fellowship include Peggy and Christine, Jim and Jazzer, and Bert and the Fair brothers, all living in frequently fraught and occasionally charming shared living arrangements. Finally, I will note that the living arrangements described here give Archer's listeners the pleasure of hearing the private voices of more Ambridge residents. With no companion at home, we would know some individuals only as public figures in the village shop or at the Bull. Hearing private voices adds dimensionality and richness to these, dare I say, imagined characters. We hear the tenderness in how Lindy speaks to Robert at home, and it gives us greater patience for her imperious command of the Christmas panto. We cringe through chilly night at Andrew's but find the good behind Susan's social striving because Neil sees through it. Similarly, extended family co-residence has given us exposure more than once to Lillian's broken heart laid bare to Jennifer at home farm, and we understood the context of Pip's pregnancy decision better than her parents did because of her conversations with Elizabeth at Lower Loxley. Further, only we and Peggy know the true extent of Christine's penury. So to summarize, the context of Ambridge reveals fresh insights about extended family and non-kin co-residence. We see that land ownership is a mechanism through which social class shapes opportunity. We're reminded that rural housing economies present unique challenges to nuclear family and solo co-residence that can really be resolved only by luck and social connection. And finally, we can hypothesize that co-residence may serve as a balm against loneliness and improve older health, particularly for Ambridge's older adults. Thank you.
and Paula can both come back and sort of perch on the stage, however you're comfortable really. And if our microphone grabbers, now it is important, even if you've got a really loud voice, that you use the microphone so that John can pick it up and that our friends beyond the room can hear us. Right. Right, lots there on housing. I've got one at the front, two. Can I take another question? That'll do to start with, yes.
How would you classify Lillian, who seems to have gone through every phase? She seemed to own the Dower house, then there was some deal with Matt, and then she's homeless and living with her sister, and then she's living with Justin. She seems to have gone through the lot. I think she's now co-residence. What do you think?
I guess that's directly to Paula, isn't it?
Yes, so I do think that she's gone back to a sort of more traditional form of co-residence, although she's no longer the owner of the property, which puts her in a very precarious position. And but she does have this resource that she can fall back on at home farm.
I think it also demonstrates something that I didn't pick up on in mine, but it is there, which is the solution for many people is to marry well, or at least well. It's done wonders for Jenny, for example. Yes. Right, gentleman in the middle.
Ladies, thank you for your fascinating papers. They're both very interesting. But are you not in danger of over-egging the crisis, the housing crisis in Ambridge? Because one thinks to what Gleblands, obviously the Thwaites are there, but who else? Manorfield Close, let's not forget Manorfield Close. The barn conversions near Jiggins Field. The Green, we know of 2 people who live on the Green, but there must be other houses there, council houses. Endless cottages at Home Farm, of course, endless, they keep appearing. And just who is living at Manorfield Court these days?
And also the special needs school. Anyone converting that into luxury lofts? I think it's a really good point, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is actually, in all this time, where is the proper affordable housing? Well, actually, where they've had substantial developments, there must have been, at Grange Spinney and all those, there must have been a proportion of affordable housing. And I can't believe that none of it's ever come vacant that would have suited Fred and Emma. So there's just no mention. The only people we know that are living in social housing are the Horrobins, which I think is not necessarily the best representation. But actually that's what would have been there a generation or so ago, and that's not what isn't there now. And I suppose the issue is about scarcity and timing. So it's not having something come vacant when somebody needs it. That's why we talk about the Ambridge Vary, because magically cottages appear out of the air. Any more questions out there? One there, and someone else? Down here, Olivia.
No, I was pointing to Madeline.
Oh. If you could say who you are, just so just so we can tweet that you're...
Nina? Yeah. Okay, it's Madeline Lafay. My question is, and it's a philosophical one really. Emma has she's wants to live in Elliotville, but by becoming a member of the parish council, has she shot herself in the foot and will be accused of bribery, collusion, corruption?
Connie Nolan, also known as Feisty Woman Kent. Claire, you asked us to remind you about Retreat of the State.
Yep, Retreat of the State before 9:30 in the morning on Saturday. Well, I kind of touched on that already, actually, in the sense that there might have been a role. And when I pitched this paper, which was back in the summer, the thing that frustrated me is that no one was looking at politics as a solution to the problem. Actually, since then, Emma has got onto the parish council, partly because of the issues around Elliotville. Are we going to call it Elliotville? So I take some heart from that, but I think everyone knew well in advance of her becoming a parish council that she was supportive of the concept. and she is one of the people who really needs affordable housing in the village. So I think it would be pretty harsh for people to suggest that it's some sort of collusion at that point, because she wasn't on the parish council when it all went through. Well, she just about was, but
I mean, you could call it gerrymandering, couldn't you? I don't know about that. No. Anybody else have burning questions on the housing crisis in Ambridge? Elizabeth Campion. God, this is like primary school.
I'll just stay standing. So I've had an experience of co-residence with my grandparents, and I know we were just talking about how there's no housing crisis in Ambridge because there are ever-repairing houses, but is it possible that there is a sort of very subtle political / propaganda aspect to so many young adults being co-resident in Ambridge, because there might not be a way for them to go to Birmingham, for example, and get work? Do you think, because I'm fascinated by the way that the Arch isn't supposed to be political, but because almost everything is political, there's always going to be an angle on something. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think this is essentially a case about aging in place because there's no opportunity elsewhere. Is that right? Is that what you're suggesting, that for these older adults there are fewer, particularly if you look at certainly Joe and even Eddie, they really don't have any transferable job skills to other settings. And so yeah, I think that co-residence is a sort of consequence and a strategy to deal with aging in place because of lack of opportunity elsewhere.
And we had one. What was it? Oh yes.
You didn't mention at all the role of bed and breakfast and the sudden appearance of the spare room or the storage room at the Bull into resolving housing issues arising from separation, divorce or conflict.
It doesn't seem to be a regular thing. It is an emergency bolt hole, isn't it, amongst the twist boxes for people who have infidelities generally.
Yeah, the heartbreak suite at the Bull. I was thinking about this because, if you remember, so when they started, there was that bit about the Grundys coming up against Lindy with her established B&B, and they were doing basically an Airbnb without calling it Airbnb. And then all that business when Pitt moved out of Rickyard, apparently it was tenanted on short-term basis. You never heard any of that about people coming in, people coming out. You know, it was kind of. I wonder if the so certainly in terms of how the platform economy in Ambridge, another paper for another year. Get your thinking might be the ways in which platform economies play out differently in a rural setting, because the Airbnb model in Ambridge, I think, would be.
But the Airbnb model in Ambridge, so all of the debt that Brookfield had, Pitt goes and does some extra shifts somewhere else, and then everything else comes in through that Airbnb. I mean, £1,000 a night, was that the rate? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, someone was on Twitter recently complaining about the Brookfield financial crisis, which was like, it lasted about a fortnight.
Yeah.
Long enough for her to go and get up a duff by Toby. Not an example of marrying well.
Just briefly, I found just reminded me that the flat above the shop that seemed to be elastic, because at one point it was tiny, and then Helen plus Annette plus a baby were going to be able to live in it. Is anyone living in it now?
It got refurbed after the flood, and then Hazel Willis let it out to somebody else, but to somebody we don't know, because Fallon lived there with Reese. Welsh farmer. So various people lived above the shop, but it's gone out of the Ambridge sort of rotational availability, a bit like how Dr. Locke moved into the Grundy's old place, and then that seems to have disappeared into the ether.
Is Leo here? Leo Horstmeyer. Is he here? He's got the spreadsheet on.
He's listening now.
He's listening. Hi, Leo. The Sage of Ambridge has a spreadsheet on all of that. So who owns what and how well, yes, and Hazel. I mean, Hazel's property wealth in Ambridge is significant, isn't it? I mean, it's not a.
Maybe just for the tabards, the flat above the shop.
Yes, they're storing boxes of tabards. Anybody have anything else to say about housing? Yes, lady there. Sorry, Mike people, this is a workout, isn't it? Don't mind if you put your Fitbit on, Abby.
Thank you. Does the panel have any view on what the average house price is now in Ambridge? Would it be better if when we're looking for an investment to actually buy or perhaps rent and then with a view to then buying?
Well, average house price is in an imaginary place. I did look at some of it. I would suggest that she means near the village. I mean, I was looking at what the threshold access routes might be for affordability, but because they don't talk about that kind of stuff very much at all, and they don't really know what people are earning either, it's a really difficult thing to measure. I would probably go for something around an average West Midlands rural area, if you can get data on that. But again, it's a bit difficult to pin down. And the issue is not so much what the house prices are, it's about how accessible the housing is and how affordable it is through whichever route you might want to go. And I think that's what we're seeing really sort of tricky for all generations, to be honest, but we see it nationally for younger generations and we see it in Ambridge as well, which is true. I mean, if they all suddenly found really affordable housing with no trouble, it wouldn't reflect reality at all.
Which I guess is back to Elizabeth's point about there's a politics sort of submerged and lurking within, because the co-residence does provide, I mean, you know, but having a breakfast with the Fairbrothers, I mean, it's, you know, it's, it does throw, as you said, it throws people together into kind of intriguing, if you were writing a soap, if you were doing a drama, you might. But yes, I agree with Elizabeth essentially. I think there is a housing crisis in the UK. The state has retreated, and whether Harrison Burns had to go and blag his dad out of 50 or 500,000, we just don't know. You know, it wasn't ever. Was it clear how much he borrowed from them? No. And how much honeysuckle was? So I guess it's sort of under the category of sort of vague, right, rather than really, really precise on that. Oh, hello. How are you doing there?
So the intergenerational thing I find quite interesting because there doesn't seem to be a sort of social issue between them. I live with a 30-something who has a revolving door provided by Tinder. I don't think if he was living with my
that is a paper.
But you know, in the Toby Fairbrother Bert situation, if my housemate was to be living with my grandma, she would not be okay with that, and there doesn't seem to be commentary. So either are they all just not Tindering, or are the older people just totally okay with it?
Wow! If you remember, Elizabeth was quite cross when he tied his bike to the bush.
Yes, yeah. There's a euphemism.
Say the rural broadband wasn't good enough for them to be on Tinder because it drops in and out, right? That could be it.
What did you say? We couldn't hear. What did you say? I was saying, but the tie his bike to the bush, there's a euphemism.
There's always a euphemism. Completely lost it now. Yes! Maybe more.
Roy was on Tinder.
He was, wasn't he? With his spreadsheet. Yeah, I don't know really. I guess the Bert storyline was the most.
No, I think they must keep it offside.
I think Jazz will be the same. Jazz will be on Tinder. Right, that's the paper for next year. Why isn't Jazza on Tinder?
Tracy is on Tinder,
yeah.
minute before we are on time.
It was to do with the issue of affordable housing. While I can understand that Harrison, with a steady job in the police force, could probably get a mortgage very easily, Emma and Ed, even if they could afford an affordable house, which I have huge doubts about, they have no evidence whatsoever of paying rent regularly. They both have unreliable incomes, and I think they're condemned to stay with the Grundys for a very long time.
Don't even get me started. Yes, what she said, the bell's on, and also, so it's about being able to have a deposit is one thing, but being mortgageable is another. I think Emma's completely unrealistic. I've said all along that they'd be better off, if they wanted to do home ownership, they'd be better off in shared ownership, start small, be stable. But even then, what are the rest of the Grundys going to do if they move out? Like, no one seems to have talked about this at all. And there's this deadline looming where they're theoretically going to get somewhere else to live.
At the back, final question.
With me at the back.
Sorry, very good, Al.
I just wonder if there is any shared ownership in Ambridge or social housing at all.
Well, there's the old council housing, which partly sold off, because that's what Neil and Susan did. There's going to be some in Elliotville, but I would like to think there'd be some shared ownership at Elliotville. I don't think there should just be start homes. Apart from anything else, that's not reflecting the current position in terms of planning policy. So if that's what they're trying to do, it's not realistic. But who knows? No one's been specific about what the affordable housing is at Elliotville. And if you want a long discussion of what I would have put in the Section 106 agreement, come and find me at a break.
Now that's a threat. Ladies, do you have any closing thoughts, or are you happy to retreat back? That was a fabulous panel. I think we could all. So, housing is only part of how you frame place. Cara will talk about housing, she tells me. I think, in a sense, this second section of Ambridgonomics, forgive me if I'm wrong, it's slightly more conceptual. You might think about the place. And we have first Cara, and then the dream team from Newcastle.
So, today I'm going to talk about what the place of Ambridge is, its identity as a place, and how the residents go about, how they're active in making that identity too. And this is one of the main areas of my research, and it's a sector called placemaking. Does what it says on the tin anyway. Placemaking is both an approach and a set of tools that puts the community first in determining what their place looks like and how it functions. It focuses on solving some quite specific problems in a place, and it's a community-led urban design sort of tool, essentially. And this is where my own research sits, but I look particularly at where the arts can be used as a mechanism in this as well. And I'm going to look at some of the cultural aspects of this in this paper. So important to be mindful of in this paper are some of the key facets of placemaking, namely that people in place are the basic unit of placemaking, and this is what makes it different from simply architecture or urban design. It's the real human element in it. Placemaking is carried out by a variety of people, architects, planners, engineers, so on and so forth, but the community is an equal expert in that. They are the expert in knowing what it's like to live in that place, so they're very front and foremost in placemaking. And then how people think about their place, how they talk about it, how they anchor their own sense of self in their place, that's place identity. And when people become to be engaged in a place, they begin to share common goals for that place. They also then begin to steward that place and take care of it. And for some, they'll go on to be involved quite actively in local politics and get quite civically active. So I'm focusing on the rural here, using Ambridge as an example of rural placemaking, because actually placemaking as a whole has tended to focus on urban areas because they're probably deemed a little bit more sexy than a rural area. So this is a really under-researched area, and Ambridge actually can really elucidate onto a new practice of rural placemaking as both a site of learning for rural studies and for placemaking too. And this is also why I chose this quote from Brian for my paper title. And the rural areas aren't set in aspect. I know that I grew up in a rural area, and Ambridge shows us really that a rural identity is one that's in constant flux. It's a place of massive social change. It has top-down policies being forced on it that it has to react to all the time. And we see in Ambridge also that the local community is really active in making what Ambridge is. And it's sort of material conditions as well as the lived experience of being in Ambridge. So let's turn to this place called Ambridge now. So these were some of the common things that you all said when I put it out to the Facebook page, that you associated with what the place of Ambridge was. It's quite interesting there. You've got some real things, like Millennium Woods. You've got some online things there as well about the tweet-along, so I haven't got time to talk about it in this paper, but that virtual identity of Ambridge is a really valid site of placemaking too. And so those are the things there that are sort of active in the creation and expression of an Ambridge sense of place, its place identity. And I guess topographically and spatially, Ambridge is essentially just like any other village up and down the country, but what makes it different are some of those material characteristics of it, and that's what I'll turn to now. Now, I did a place standard for Ambridge. It's an online tool for community development where you put in, answer different questions about your place, and you get this kind of score. Lower ranges are for where there's room for improvement, and higher ranges is where there's not, where the condition is good. And I present these in my poster, and I'll put the full findings of these online as well. So Ambridge public transport leaves a lot to be desired. For example, people having to get lifts with formal one-night stands to get anywhere. They have to walk everywhere, as Christy and Michael so eloquently sort of told us last year. And the streets aren't safe either from cars that are speeding or that have a murderous intent. Housing, or the lack of it, especially for the working class, is a big issue, as we have heard, and I will touch on that again in a moment. And overall, the Ambridge place identity score is actually towards the lower end of the scale. And it's not this sort of bucolic idyll that perhaps the Ambridge residents themselves may purport it to be. I think it has... Okay, anybody that knows me knows that I listen to the Archers because I don't like any of the characters and I like to have a go at them. So Ambridge, I think, has I really love Pip. Ambridge has this really exaggerated sense of self, I think. It looks down on those outside the village, it's very wary of newcomers, and it has absolutely no critical self-awareness of itself as a village, which leads, I think, to a level of cognitive dissonance amongst the residents. So we know there's absolute rubbish, isn't it? There is some awful interpersonal behaviour between the residents in Ambridge, and yet, of course, when threatened, they would never say that, and they close ranks and they think it's the best place in the world ever. So moving on to some of the placemakings of Ambridge, and I contend that it's got a typology of traditional placemaking and then also contemporary placemaking, and a fair amount of imagined placemaking in it as well. So traditional placemaking. There's lots of things in the annual Ambridge calendar that fit into this section: the village fete, flower and produce show, bonfire on the green, etc., etc. There are some suddenly appearing and disappearing traditions like the wassail here. Me growing up in Somerset, to be really honest, when they had the wassail, that was the lead news item on the TV. It was such a big deal. And it's in Ambridge 1 year and then it goes again. And we've got some invented traditions like the whole heritage of the tumble tussock cider as well. And traditional rural placemaking is really linked to this idea of a rural heritage, and it's linked to the seasons and the land, which of course any rural resident is really kind of codependent on. It's very aware of that, and their livelihoods are dependent on those seasons. And research also finds that a continuity, or that sense of continuity with the past, is really key to an individual's psychological well-being, because they place such a significance on places in the past to maintain that sense of identity. And the pub is a major site of traditional placemaking. They obviously, we all know it, create a sense of belonging for the communities that they serve. And this is particularly true in rural areas, and you see pubs actually going above and beyond the role of just serving alcohol, or not, if somebody's had too much to drink. But they'll be the site as well in a lot of places for the sports club to meet, the book club to meet, so on and so forth. And then contemporary placemaking. We have such hip things as Linda and Elizabeth Guerrilla Gardening, the Green Cemetery. The Ambridge Observer has reported on a pop-up open-air cinema on the Penny Hassett. The Cider Club could equally be found in Shoreditch as it could in Ambridge. And Lexi and Roy have visited the apparently annual Felpersham street food market. Now, these consumption-orientated activities are seen as a bit of a panacea for rural decline, essentially. Tourism is really key to rural economies as they reimagine, repackage, and represent to abundantly urban class the idea of, this idea of a rural lifestyle. Now, the future of Ambridge placemaking. It's with Elliotville now that the development and the past, present and future of Ambridge identity is going to be played out. And there's an opportunity here for a bit of a cash injection to help improve the condition of the village there too. So we've seen how with Linda, the development and its mention of affordable housing has really brought out the rural living class snob in her, and her really barbed comment on the 16th of August Parish Council meeting of these types of people that would be moving into the affordable housing. Drawing, this development is drawing out people's fear of change. It's going to be upsetting to the class structure in Ambridge potentially, and the development I think is seen as quite a disconnect to the condition of the land in Ambridge. But there's a need for housing in the village, as we've seen, to keep people living in the village as much as to keep local services and communities alive too. It's quite interesting, Fallon and Harrison putting themselves in financial hock to move into a house that's too small for them is just how desperate the situation is. And there's hidden homeless. The Fairbrothers have been hidden homeless for a while, Jazza has been as well, all the sofa surfing that goes on, even Lexi having her sort of tied accommodation again. She was sort of no fixed abode at that particular time. But we see with Emma the archetypal journey of placemaking played out through her character. She's somebody that has an attachment to place. She's become more aware of its issues of place, and then she's becoming more civically active. So Emma's becoming a place activist. I love this. Halfway through this in the slide, I think it's brilliant. She's enacting her love of place just as justified as Linda would be as middle-class warrior, or Jenny as the Boudica of Worcestershire. I cannot say Worcestershire, I'm sorry. So the development also, and the newcomers, will bring their own cultural expectations to Ambridge. It will have a huge impact on Ambridge place identity. And also the development offers an opportunity for a bit of cash injection into the village too. So it can do this through Section 106 monies. I'm going to keep it really brief. You could be here all day talking about Section 106 if you wanted to. But it's essentially a planning agreement that's entered into by the local authority and the developer, whereby a percentage of that development value is set aside, Section 106 agreement, and those monies to be spent for the good of the village. And that can be spent on infrastructure things, cultural things. It could go on, supporting a school or what have you. But I'm going to look at what this could possibly look like from a cultural and artistic point of view. So Justin and the Worcestershire Council will have had their own Section 106 agreement. The Parish Council will have a role in determining how that money is spent. So let's look at what that money could be spent on. So we know from the place standard exercise that bus stops are an issue in Ambridge. So we could have some architect-designed bus stops in the village. Huntley on the Scottish borders, and then a town called Wassaic in the States. They've both adopted a whole town as a gallery approach, where there's continuous artistic programming going throughout the year. Marfa in Texas has turned itself into a town-wide public art park. So could we see similar in Ambridge? Just as we've got cities of culture, could we have a village of culture? Could Ambridge win it? Could there be an artist commission for an Angel of Lakey Hill? Or could Bartleby be immoralised at the White Horse Convention? Now Brian wants to sponsor a local event. Rather than having it as Brian Fest, could it be a Water to Blue cheese rolling event? We could capitalise on Linda's love of her busy reading schedule and her event skills to create a literature festival to rival that of Hay. Or could it bring back Locksfest and become an annual music event? Just as you see, this is Kendal Calling. Again, it's a huge deal up in that part of the world. So to conclude, Ambridge and place identity. To recap on what we've learnt so far about the place and placemaking at Ambridge. So we've seen how the people of Ambridge are involved in a kind of productive nostalgia. They use placemaking activities such as the markets and fetes and the like to produce and reproduce village life for themselves as much as for any visitor. We've learnt that issues that challenge place identity bring out people's true colours, but they're also something that people can enact their sense of place attachment through and become civically active in the life of the village. And we've seen how the newcomers to Elliotville will both bring their own cultural expectations with them and then could also possibly get involved in local politics, breaking that cabal of political power that we see in Ambridge at the moment. And we've learnt that development monies could be used to fund activities and initiatives that confirm the village's identity and to itself and to others, and to galvanise and revitalise its culture. Now, Ambridge, I think, is a place that projects itself as a rural idyll. It's a place of social harmony, apparently, tranquility and safety, and it has a traditional and fixed place identity, or so it would like you to think of it. It has this perversely singular vision of itself, and it really does believe its own. The reality of Ambridge, as we all know, is actually very different from that. And through a placemaking prism, we can see that reality of Ambridge, like any rural place, is a place identity is dynamic and it's in constant flux. It's made and remade from the grassroots up, as well as from the top down through policy and also from society from all around it. And actually in this, we have, Ambridge offers us a vision of a rural futurism. It sits at the intersection of global, national and local forces. It contests past, present and future all the time.
All right, I'm defending you with my flapjacks.
Sorry? Okay. And it signals really, and this is a quote from Nicola, a graft and grow and not identical cut and paste idea to what a rural community and placemaking is. Thank you. I like to think that's the younger generation there in their space age farms.
I hope someone's tweeting about rural futurism, because that's through flapjacks instead. Right, Newcastle gang.
Is that on?
Is that one on?
Yes.
A brave decision, I have to say. People are pretty angry about your remarks on rural proofing. What do you say to rural residents who accuse you of being a so-called academic and out-of-touch townie? Why do you insist that rural proofing wouldn't help people in Borsetshire?
What would I expect from the Borchester Echo? As so-called professor, we're getting into fake truths already. if the Borchester Echo had even done some basic background research, you would know that I have very many credentials. Apart from having grown up in a rural area, I've done over 30 years of research on this. Anyway, the Borchester Echo, I believe you just recently appointed a business editor from the Larrawonga Clarion. But to get to your point, the basic problem with rural proofing, which Lord Cameron
acknowledged when he reinvigorated it, it's very flawed, and it basically presumes rural poverty and urban privilege, and it doesn't look at the fact that actually you need to look at the Aldridges and the Archers, who are very wealthy in Ambridge, and do they need rural proofing? What exactly is your point?
Well, you can't brush people's concerns aside just like that, Professor Shortall. There are real issues here for rural residents, and I'm very glad that you mentioned Mrs. Grundy of Ambridge. As you can see, she was extremely angry. That you didn't agree about the challenges of housing in Borsetshire, and she made some comments about newcomers that we actually couldn't print. So-called affordable homes are beyond many of our readers' pockets, and they're snapped up by commuters or even by second homeowners as holiday homes. Wouldn't a better consideration of the implications of government housing policy help people like the Grundy family?
You really are determined to get the wrong end of the stick. I'm very sympathetic to Emma Grundy, and there is a real rural housing problem in Ambridge, but there's also urban housing problems. And if you remember, when the Grundys lost their farm and moved into Meadow Rise, the Barchester Sink estate, everything went wrong. Ed Grundy went off the rails. Eddie bought a caravan and moved back to Ambridge because the quality of life was so much better. Clary was so worried they were going to have to move back. You know, so this is a question of poverty. And if you were doing your research properly, I would suggest you go and speak to Claire Asbury, Head of Housing Strategy at Luton, who has done some very good analysis on social class issues related to housing in Ambridge.
Well, I see you've been doing some background research about our residents. I think that's a little bit creepy, actually. But I've also spent some time speaking to people in Ambridge about transport issues. You'll have seen that we did report Mr. Aldridge's comments about fuel cost. He's a very prominent local farmer, you know, and he feels that as custodians of the countryside, farmers just don't get enough special consideration on extra costs such as fuel. I've also talked to some younger residents, particularly teenagers. They all complain about the lack of public transport. For somebody in Ambridge, the nearest railway station is Hollerton Junction. It's miles away. There's virtually no bus service now. Surely that's a specifically rural problem.
You know, you're defending Brian Aldridge, driving around in his 4x4, poisoning the people of Ambridge and eating venison casseroles. But I did see some suggestions on Twitter. There might be other reasons why you're defending Brian Aldridge. So, I'm not remotely sorry for Brian Aldridge. Grundy on his pony and trap, that's a different story. But again, transport is an issue for people of a certain social class. And if you go to some of the peripheral sink estates in urban areas where people don't have cars, transport can be a real issue for those people too. And those are the sorts of issues that a Borchester Echo reporter should be looking at, rather than presuming rural disadvantage and urban privilege.
That's all very interesting, Professor Shortall, and we'll certainly be running a much longer feature next week, in next week's paper, so I hope you've got evidence to back up your arguments.
Well, you can be sure I've got my evidence, but I suggest that you, in the Borchester Echo, start doing your background research.
Well, I think that's quite enough for...
Just put the neck down. Yeah, just sort of finish it back.
Right, so I was completely wrong. We're still on housing. Question at the front.
Hello, thank you. I live in a small rural community and we are currently absolutely breaking our backs over our neighbourhood plan. Our neighbourhood plan would cover every aspect that you've touched on, the placemaking, the transport, the housing, all of that. And unless I've missed an episode, because I have to admit occasionally I do, Is there any? I'm just thinking neighbourhood plan. You could, if you started it with Emma and the council, you could dip into it and cover all of these aspects. Just to well, you're not writing it, are you? So who am I speaking? But I have been waiting to hear, because so many rural communities are doing it because it can be protective. It has to be looked at in law before there's any sort of housing development. Anyway, I've said my bit.
No,
so.
I absolutely agree, and there is a staggering lack of mention of the neighbourhood plan. It's something that the parish council would have been made aware of. It's anyway that I think Linda would have sniffed out and found and wanted to bring into the village. There's also been, with the development, a lack of any mention of any local MP and any petitioning in that way. There was a mention, Roy was going onto the council website to look at the planning application, and that was, I think, the only mention of actually that kind of process behind the scenes of the development. So there is a huge complete lack of that. I mean, we could perhaps crowdsource a local plan for Ambridge online, but yeah, it's a really glaring omission.
I was just going to follow that up with, it seems that Neil's word is the final word. It seems that it all finishes at the parish council, and that certainly doesn't work in my neighbourhood plan, and I'm just wondering if, you care to comment on that aspect too.
Well, Neil's just quite lovely, so maybe that's okay. No, but it would be a much more complex set of people getting involved in that process. And it wouldn't just be the parish council, it would happen at the county council level and also a regional council level as well. There's all sorts of factors come into play. But also, as I said before, there's still a stunning lack of voice within the parish council again about all of these concerns.
Is anybody else involved in neighbourhood planning processes?
I'm chair of my neighbourhood plan.
How are you? Bet they love you, Claire. Because I've done some work on neighbourhood planning, and it's very interesting. And again, it's back to Elizabeth's point about the politics in Ambridge. These politics were quite clear. You think that the local press are in bed with Brian Aldridge, literally. I think, how far are rural proofing and placemaking political projects? See, that was good.
Rural proofing is a political project in that I think it allows government to say that they are looking at rural issues without actually doing so in any meaningful way. It's one of those policies that sounds really good but actually has no focus or no objective. But yes, in terms of our reporter and Brian Aldridge, sorry, Colin.
I think anything that has that certainly happens out in the public realm and involves people in a political thing, and placemaking is something that you can use quite strategic and tactically to actually go around political systems as well, because it can be so grassroots. You can do kind of activities in spite of things rather than because of certain funding or whatever. So actually it's a tool that the residents of Ambridge could be really mobilising, actually.
So it's Claire at the front. Have you got
Yeah.
Claire here and there.
Just so if they'd had a neighbourhood plan and they had a community infrastructure levy in Borsetshire, they'd be getting more money coming into the village. So they should have done one.
Some people don't find planning very interesting though, Claire.
Hello, I live in a rural community in Somerset, and we have an entirely independent town council, and it's really interesting seeing the interplay between the independent town council, which is all for free in Somerset, and the district council, Mendip District Council, and seeing the interplay between the parking charges, everything that's controlled by the district council compared to the town council. And whenever a piece of land comes up and everyone says, what are Fring Town Council doing about this? And they say, well, we don't own the land, it's Mendip District Council, we can't control that. And it's quite frustrating sometimes.
And that whole business about the scale, so the state doesn't just retreat, as Claire said,
it retreats in terms of scale, so power collects at different scales. And what's been intriguing about the neighbourhood planning, I won't call it a policy, is that it's the more strategic tiers have been denuded at the same time. And the work that I've done on neighbourhood planning has always had a really strong, normally conservative mayor or member of parliament who's been connected in some way, or, actually interestingly, academics acting as consultants. So there's in fact your colleagues at Newcastle, get out quite a lot in working at that grassroots level. But when you're lacking either a regional spatial strategy or a regional housing strategy, or God forbid even a subnational spatial policy, is a disaster at the current time. Is that an air quotes? So as a result, any scale that seems to function at all is under huge pressure, because you're supposed to solve every issue, from the kind of village green to the kind of World Bank, with some well-meaning volunteers. Linda can't do everything. Linda can't do everything. Well, exactly. So we won't do a planning theory lecture. I think, unless there's any more questions, I think that is the first session drawing to a close. So, we need to get out and back in again for a prompt start at 11 on the dot.
15 minutes as well. I'm just leaving them down there when I'm not. You know it's only 10:15.